You ever notice how people love to play guessing games? They'll whisper, they'll stare, they'll circle around the truth, but they never just say it out loud. Obsession works the same way. It hides in the shadows, shows up in little clues, small signs, subtle patterns that everyone else misses. But you feel it. You feel the weight of someone's attention clinging to you, like a shadow that won't let go. And the funny thing is, you already know their name. It's not a stranger. It's not a random face in the crowd. It's the one you've been trying not to think about. The one who's been there all along, watching closer than you realize. Obsession hides in plain sight, and that's the beauty of it. Everyone thinks obsession is loud, obvious, desperate, like a fan screaming in the crowd. But no, the real thing, it's quiet. It's clever. It doesn't march in waving its arms. It slips into the corners of your life like smoke, invisible to everyone else, but suffocating to you. The world passes by without noticing, because they're too busy looking for the obvious signs. But obsession doesn't play fair. It thrives where eyes aren't looking, right in the open, wearing a smile, shaking hands, blending in with the ordinary. That's how it gets away with everything. Because people expect monsters to roar, but the most dangerous ones whisper. The truth is, you've probably already seen it, but you convinced yourself it was nothing. A glance held too long, a question asked too often, a presence that shows up a little too perfectly timed. The hints are there, scattered across your days like breadcrumbs. But because obsession doesn't knock on the door screaming, you brush it aside. That's what makes it powerful. It hides inside what looks normal. A simple hello, a casual compliment, a friendly message. To everyone else, it's invisible, harmless. But to you, it lingers. It presses. It follows you even when they're not around. That's how obsession works. It doesn't need to be announced. It hides in the smallest cracks until it owns the whole room. And the world doesn't believe you when you point it out. That's the cruelest part. You try to explain, to say there's something off, something heavy about the way they look at you, the way they appear in places they shouldn't. But people laugh it off. You're imagining things. You're overthinking. No, you're not. You feel it because it's real. But obsession is clever. It wears a mask of innocence, and the crowd always believes the mask. That's why it hides in plain sight. Because the best way to stay unseen is to stand where everyone is already looking and act like you belong. Obsession is patient. It doesn't need to rush. It weaves itself into your routine, inch by inch, until one day you realize it's everywhere. You see it in the corner of your eye. You feel it in the silence. You hear it in the way your own thoughts repeat their name, even when you don't want to. That's the trick. It doesn't just hide around you. It hides inside you. You carry it without realizing. Because once someone's attention has sunk its claws into you, it doesn't let go. You might laugh, distract yourself, pretend it's not there, but deep down, you know. You always know. And what makes it so chilling is how ordinary it looks. It doesn't take grand gestures or wild outbursts. Sometimes obsession hides behind kindness, politeness, even love. Sometimes it hides behind the person who always checks in, who always remembers little details, who always makes sure you notice them noticing you. To everyone else, they look thoughtful, caring, normal. But to you, the weight is unmistakable. It's not what they do, it's how it feels. It's the way their presence presses against your skin like heat, even when they're across the room. That's obsession's disguise. Ordinary actions carrying extraordinary weight. That's why it's so hard to escape it. You can't point to one big thing and say, "There, that's the proof." Because obsession doesn't work like that. It builds its power in the shadows, in the spaces between words, in the quiet repetition of little acts. And by the time you finally admit to yourself what it is, it's already wrapped around you. The mask is still smiling. The crowd still thinks everything's fine, but you know the truth. You've known it all along. Obsession doesn't need to hide in the dark when the brightest place in the room will do just fine. Attention leaves invisible marks. Marks you don't see at first, but you feel them. That's the trick with it. It doesn't show up as bruises, doesn't cut skin, doesn't bleed. No, it's quieter than that. It sinks into the air, into the way you carry yourself, into the way your mind starts replaying moments you didn't ask for. You walk into a room, and suddenly you're aware of eyes, of weight, of someone focusing on you longer than they should. And while everyone else talks, laughs, moves on, you're left with the imprint of that gaze. It doesn't vanish. It clings. Invisible, but heavy. That's the thing about attention. It's sticky. People think it's harmless. A glance, a word, a laugh. Just normal things. But too much of it, repeated, sharpened, directed at you like a spotlight, and it burns. It shapes the way you move, the way you speak, the way you second guess yourself. You start asking questions you didn't before. Why did they notice that? Why did they say that? Why are they still here? Their focus rewires your thinking, and suddenly your actions aren't fully yours anymore. You're adjusting, shifting, reacting to eyes that never leave. Invisible marks are the most dangerous because no one else can see them. To the outside world, you look fine, untouched. But inside, you're carrying the scratches. The way you tense when they enter a room. The way you feel their shadow in your thoughts, even when they're not around. The way their presence keeps echoing after they're gone. And when you try to explain it, nobody gets it. They shrug. So what if someone's paying attention to you, but they don't understand? It's not the kind of attention you invite. It's the kind that sticks without asking. Attention like that doesn't just follow you. It shapes you. Think about it. If someone keeps watching long enough, they start training you without words. You begin anticipating their reaction, changing your behavior without meaning to. You wear different expressions. You censor your words. You avoid certain spaces. Slowly, their attention becomes a cage. Not a visible one, no bars, no locks, but you feel trapped all the same. And the cruelest part, nobody else sees the cage, so they tell you it's not real. But you know it is, because you're the one stuck inside. It's almost funny how attention can leave scars deeper than wounds you can see. Physical pain heals, but invisible marks, they linger. They're stitched into your memory, into the way you interpret silence, into the way you flinch at certain patterns. You might forget the exact words, but you never forget the way they made you feel. That's how invisible marks work. They don't remind you of what happened. They remind you of what it did to you, and obsession feeds on those marks. Every look, every word, every gesture builds another invisible layer until you're covered in them. To everyone else, you're untouched, free, just living your life. But inside, you're carrying the fingerprints of someone else's attention. Fingerprints no one else can see. Fingerprints you never asked for. That's the thing about obsession. It doesn't always break the skin. Sometimes it breaks the silence, the peace, the freedom you once had. And even when nobody else notices, you do. Because invisible marks are the hardest to hide and the hardest to forget. The one watching is closer than you think, closer than you'd ever want them to be. People imagine obsession as something distant, a stranger in the shadows, some faceless figure lurking where no one can see. But no, the truth is far more unsettling. The one watching isn't in the shadows. They're right here, in the middle of your life, sitting at the table, walking beside you, smiling when you smile. They don't need to hide because proximity is the perfect disguise. Who would suspect the one who already stands close, who already has a reason to be near? That's the trick. They blend in by being exactly where they're expected. You think distance protects you. That obsession is always out there. But the most dangerous attention comes from inside your circle. It's not the stranger staring across the street. It's the familiar face who always finds a way to be around. The coworker who remembers too many details. The friend who lingers a little too long. The one who laughs at all the right times, but never lets their eyes leave you. Familiarity makes you lower your guard. And that's when it seeps in unnoticed, unchallenged, until one day you realize they've been there all along, closer than anyone else. And the thing about closeness is, it doesn't feel wrong at first. It feels safe, natural, comfortable. You don't question it because you've grown used to their presence. That's how obsession works. It doesn't crash through the door. It slips in quietly, gets comfortable, becomes part of the furniture. By the time you notice something strange about the way they hover, the way they anticipate your moves, the way they finish your sentences, it's already too late. They've positioned themselves too close, too familiar, too expected. Closeness is power. Distance can be ignored. But when someone's near, you feel them even when they don't say a word. You feel their eyes tracing your movements, their silence pressing against you, their presence shaping the air in the room. And because they're close, every gesture carries weight. A touch on the shoulder, a casual lean in, a simple glance, all of it hits harder, lingers longer. When obsession hides behind proximity, it doesn't need to scream. It only needs to breathe. because you'll feel it anyway. The unsettling part is how easily you explain it away. They're just friendly. They care too much. They mean well. That's what you tell yourself, because the alternative is too uncomfortable. To admit that someone so close could be watching too closely means rewriting the story you've been telling yourself about safety, about trust, about who belongs in your space. So you ignore it. You smile back. You accept the attention, even when it prickles at the back of your mind, even when your instincts whisper that something isn't right. And that's exactly what obsession wants. You to silence yourself. When the one watching is close, they don't need to chase you. They just wait. Wait for you to let your guard down. Wait for you to share pieces of yourself. Wait for you to mistake obsession for loyalty. And all the while, their closeness grows heavier, more invasive, until you can't tell where you end and they begin. That's when it becomes impossible to escape. Because how do you run from someone who's already inside the walls of your life? People fear strangers in the dark, but it's not the stranger who sees you most clearly. It's the one close enough to memorize your routines, your habits, your weaknesses. The one close enough to predict you before you act. The one who doesn't need to follow you home, because they already know the way. The one watching is never as far as you think. And by the time you realize it, by the time you admit it to yourself, they've already been there, closer than you wanted, closer than you ever allowed, hiding in plain sight, under the mask of familiarity. Patterns reveal more than words. You ever notice how people think talk is the currency of truth? They clap for speeches, memorize lines, collect promises like candy, and then act surprised when the whole thing falls apart. Words are cheap. Anyone can buy them, rent them, borrow them for a night. Patterns, though, patterns are honest. They don't need a good delivery. They don't need applause. They show up the same way, again and again, until the mask slips and the real face peeks through. Listen to the rhythm of someone's life. The small repeats, the tiny predictables, and you'll hear the confession they never said out loud. Look at someone who always calls when they want something, but is nowhere when you need them. Listen to the pattern of late apologies and early departures. That's a language all its own. People spend so much time parsing speeches, analyzing declarations, clutching at dramatic moments like they're evidence. But the truth is stitched into the mundane, where they show up, how they keep promises, the way they remember or forget details. Those are the footnotes of character, the margins where honesty hides. Words will tell you what a person wishes to be. Patterns will show you what they actually are. Patterns don't lie because they don't perform. They are the rehearsed habits that survive the curtain call. Someone can smile and swear loyalty in 1,000 eloquent ways. But if their schedule shows up with excuses and their calendar is full of absence, the speech becomes theater and the pattern becomes the true narrator. It's the way they end conversations, the way their eyes divert at certain topics, the way they appear too often or not at all. Patterns are the backstage crew of truth, quiet, tireless, revealing everything while everyone else is focused on the spotlight. And the cruelty, the delicious cruelty, is how easy they are to miss. People want drama. They want fireworks, confessionals, cinematic moments where everything is declared and resolved. But life rarely hands out cinematic moments. It hands out teaspoons of repetition, the tiny disregard repeated until it becomes a wound, the small kindnesses stacked until they become a lifeline. If you're only watching for the big scene, you miss the slow reveal. Patterns whisper, and because they whisper, you have to be awake enough to listen. Most people are asleep, waiting for a shout that never comes. Patterns are patient detectives. They collect evidence without showing their hand. Over time, what looks like coincidence becomes choreography. The person who always promises to change but keeps returning to the same old behavior isn't failing at transformation. They're affirming a truth. The one who surprises you with gifts once is generous in a headline way. The one who remembers your birthday every year is loyal in a way that doesn't need press. Patterns draw the map. Words only point directions. Follow the map. The destination will be obvious. Sometimes patterns are merciless because they show you what you refuse to see. You want to believe a single apology resets the ledger, but patterns record the ledger itself. You want to believe that grand declarations override the past, but a history of small betrayals writes a story louder than any speech. When you're honest with yourself, you'll realize people's patterns have been narrating your life long before you pretended not to hear. They told you who would stay and who would leave, who would push and who would pull, who would love and who would use. You just chose to read the headlines instead of the margins. Patterns also protect you if you let them. They give you the power to predict, to prepare, to avoid traps masked as promises. Pay attention to the repeat offense disguised as uniqueness, the friend who excuses emotional absence with charisma, the lover who repeats jealousy disguised as passion, the colleague who praises you while stealing your credit. Those are all patterns wearing different outfits. Learn their wardrobe, and you'll stop being surprised when the same play unfolds. You'll start to see the hand that writes the script before it's performed again. And don't forget silence. The quiet pattern people think is nothing. Repeated silences are a kind of vocabulary. The phone that D's only when you need it. The texts that arrive in the morning, but not at night. The helpful comment that appears only when cameras are rolling. Silence can be louder than any confession. Listen to what's not said, because omissions are as intentional as proclamations. The space someone leaves consistently is a message in itself. Sometimes a wall, sometimes a doorway. So stop being taken in by the speech. Watch the film of small things. Notice how people behave when there's no audience, how they treat those they consider dispensable, how they respect or disrespect time and truth. Patterns will show you whether someone is a passing thunder or a steady shelter. Words will keep you entertained. Patterns will keep you safe. If you learn to read them, you'll stop mistaking performance for truth, and you'll start choosing people who don't just say they'll stay, but whose days already prove they intend to silence, speaks louder than presence. And isn't that the unsettling part? People are obsessed with noise. They think the loudest voice wins, the biggest gesture matters, the most dramatic entrance steals the show. But no, silence is the real stage. It's the empty pause after a question that wasn't answered. It's the absence of a word you expected. It's the way someone doesn't need to be in the room for you to feel like they're still there. That's the kind of language silence writes, and it carves deeper than any speech could. Think about it. Noise fades. You forget half the words people shout at you. The speeches blur together. The conversations dissolve in memory. But silence hangs. It lingers like smoke in a room, long after the fire's been put out. You replay it in your mind. What wasn't said? What should have been said? What could have been said? That emptiness becomes louder the more you listen to it. Presence can only fill a room for a moment, but silence can echo forever. And here's the cruel truth. Silence isn't neutral. It's never just empty. It always says something. When someone refuses to answer, that's an answer. When someone doesn't show up, that absence is a statement. When someone looks at you and says nothing, that's a language your body feels before your mind translates it. Silence is never blank. It's loaded. It carries weight, meaning, intent, and the sting of it cuts sharper than words because you can't argue with it. You can twist words, but how do you twist what wasn't said? Silence has a way of magnifying obsession. The one who's watching you doesn't need to speak, doesn't need to announce themselves, doesn't even need to move. Their silence is enough. You feel it, heavy on your skin, in the pit of your stomach. The way you know a shadow is there even without looking. That silence says, I'm here, louder than any declaration could. And you believe it, because your instincts are wired to notice what's missing, to fill in the blanks. Silence plays with your imagination, and imagination is always louder, always crueler. Presence, no matter how strong, can be explained. They were there. They said this. They did that. It's easy to reason with presence. Silence, though. Silence is a riddle. You can't explain it away, so you try to solve it. You start asking questions in your head. Why didn't they answer? Why didn't they show? Why are they so quiet now? And those questions don't stop when the silence ends. They spiral. They echo. They eat at you in ways noise never could. Silence turns your own thoughts into the speaker. And the message gets louder every time you replay it. People underestimate silence because it looks weak. They think strength is in the voice, in the confrontation, in the sound. But silence can suffocate. Silence can control. Silence can make you doubt yourself more effectively than any insult. A quiet room after a fight says more than 1,000 apologies. An unanswered call says more than 100 excuses. A stare without a word says more than any monologue could. And you feel it because silence takes the place of what you wanted most, acknowledgement. And isn't it funny how silence has a way of exposing truth? People lie with words, but silence tells on them. The gap between what's said and what isn't. There's the truth. Someone who avoids answering the question. Someone who dodges the moment. Someone who vanishes when it matters. Their silence screams. Not with volume, but with clarity. It tells you exactly where they stand, whether they care, whether they're present in heart, even when they're absent in body. So don't be fooled into thinking silence is nothing. Nothing doesn't leave a mark. Nothing doesn't replay in your mind at 3 a.m. Nothing doesn't pull at your chest when you realize what should have been there wasn't. Silence is full, overflowing, louder than thunder when you've been waiting for a whisper. It doesn't just speak louder than presence. It becomes the presence. It replaces it, fills the room, fills your head, fills the spaces words could never reach. And once it's there, you can't ignore it, because silence always has the last word.